This book, Journalese, A Dictionary for Deciphering the News, is a really excellent look at the way that the media uses words in a slightly unusual, slightly loaded sense. And by far my favourite definition within it is for the word coffers. What are coffers? According to this book, they are where people of whom we disapprove keep their money. Two more words that I think are always used as a term of criticism, or at least very often used as a term of criticism, are religious and political. The rabbi's sermon about climate change, well, that was a bit political. And on the other hand, the senator's speech about abortion, that was a bit religious. In both of these contexts, people are really using the words religious and political just to mean I disagree. If the rabbi's sermon is in support of Israel, suddenly it's not politics, it's just rugged common sense. And if the senator quotes the Bible to argue in favour of supporting refugees, likewise. And so in discussing whether religion and politics should mix, there are actually two questions to think about. The role of politics in a religious space and the role of religion in a political space. As a trainee rabbi, I obviously come to this from a Jewish perspective. And for me, Jewish ethics is politics. The Torah and other Jewish texts from 10 years ago to 1,000 years ago tell us about treating our workers right, about the rights of religious suspects, animal rights, disability rights, support for those who are poor or in need, women's rights, immigrations, limits on the power of the king. There are so many different and hugely contemporary feeling topics that are covered. It's no wonder that Jewish law in Hebrew is referred to as halakha, meaning walking. It's about the way in which we walk, the way in which our lives move. How we define politics is maybe a slightly more contested question, but the best definition I ever saw was it's who gets what, when, and how. Is the question of who gets what, when, and how really so different from what our religious teachings have to say? I think maybe not. Now, of course, I don't always agree with what the Jewish teachings have to say on all these political issues, particularly as regards, for example, the role of women. But then again, we have to remember that Koffer's principle. Just because I disagree with what the Talmud says about feminism doesn't mean that it's not the Talmud's place to cover the subject. Thinking about it the other way around, though, about religion being brought into a political space, is always more controversial. And yet people's political beliefs have all sorts of roots, and these are always complicated and multifaceted, and it's impossible to point to any single cause. Some politicians get their values from their upbringing, from their family. Some politicians might get their values from dissenting from their family, doing the opposite of what the example was set by their parents. People have particular health issues that might affect their politics. People have academic backgrounds and they've got studies and expertise. Why should religion not appear on that list as well? If David Beckham is allowed a widely publicised view on Brexit, why isn't the senior rabbi of liberal Judaism allowed a widely publicised view on the Gender Recognition Act? Faith bodies might actually be particularly well placed to comment on social issues, even more so than David Beckham, if we can imagine such a thing. The Supreme Court of Canada has previously observed, even from a purely utilitarian perspective, the value to society of religion cannot be overstated. Religious organisations based on claims to unchanging truths are a stabilising influence in an increasingly fast-paced and atomised society where bonds of community are scarce and worth preserving. I almost agree with that, and then it mentioned unchanging truths. I don't think that there are so many unchanging truths. My political values derive entirely from my Judaism, and yet they're totally different to the political values that previous generations of rabbis will have derived from exactly the same religion, exactly the same corpus of text. But I go to rabbinic college every day, or at least in normal times, I go to rabbinic college every day, and I read Aramaic manuscripts while wearing a hoodie, synthesizing old and new, standing with one foot in the Torah and one foot in modern Britain, bridging that incongruity and insisting that religion has something to say about real-life issues. That's what it's about for me. One of the earliest ethical lessons in the Torah comes towards the beginning of the book of Genesis, and it's the principle of humans being created, but B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of the eternal. And the Talmud tells a story to illustrate how this principle should work. A king, it says, had a twin brother who, having not become the king, instead became a highwayman. And eventually he was caught and he was hung, and his corpse was hung outside the city. And when the king saw this, he ordered his twin brother's body to be taken down, because people would see the body, think it was the king who had been hung, and that would have been a desecration of the position of monarch. And so too, if all human beings are created in the image of God, that level of dignity needs to attach to all of us, because whenever a human is treated without that dignity, people will look on and see God being treated without that dignity. Now these days, the bogeyman probably isn't a highwayman. Maybe it's a refugee. Maybe it's a Black Lives Matter protester. Maybe it's a schoolgirl who left the UK to join ISIS. But why, though, can the Talmud's principle not still apply today? It's the role of faith leaders and faith followers to make the necessary adjustment.